instead, the Europeans are saying, don't tax the wealthy, tax labor even more, squeeze labor by raising gas prices, by removing the subsidies of gas, so that your labor is going to be squeezed and we can grab what you have more easily. So the Europeans are treating the Ukrainians not like they're treating themselves, not like they're treating the former Soviet countries brought in, but really like a defeated enemy to be burdened with reparations, and especially to rule through their sort of proconsuls as the kleptocrats that have been assigned as governors by the military junta that took over in Kiev.
Quand ils sont tout neufs, qu'ils sortent de l'œuf, du cocon, tous les jeunes blancs-becs prennent les vieux mecs pour des cons. Quand ils sont devenus des têtes chenues et des grisons, tous les vieux fourneaux prennent les genoux pour des cons. Moi qui balance entre deux âges, je leur adresse à tous un message. Le temps ne fait rien à l'affaire, quand on est con, on est con. Qu'on ait 20 ans, qu'on soit grand-père, quand on est con, on est con. Entre vous, plus de controverses, qu'on caduque ou qu'on débutant. Petit con de la dernière averse, vieux con des neiges d'antan. Petit con de la dernière averse, vieux con des neiges d'antan. Vous les cons naissants, les cons innocents, les jeunes cons qui ne le niaient pas, prenez les papas.
President Vladimir Putin is meeting Russian diplomats to outline the future of Moscow's foreign policy right now. Let's listen in to what he has to say.
Define priorities in foreign affairs and to coordinate the activities of our missions abroad. The workload here at the ministry and in our embassies is very high, and we realize that, but it will not decrease, it will only increase, just as the requirements in terms of accuracy, flexibility of our actions in protecting and pursuing Russia's national interests abroad. You're well aware how dynamic international developments are. The situation is developing very fast, and not all of them are positive. There are more and more conflicts, and old conflicts are spreading up again. Very often we face them in surprised ways, and unfortunately we see that international law fails and that simple rules of conduct fail, and so the principle of lawlessness prevails. That's what we see in Ukraine. The events which were provoked in Ukraine are the symbol of the policy of containment. And so these policies goes down to decades back, and that containment policy has not stopped after the end of the Cold War. As you saw in Ukraine, our compatriots found themselves under threat. It's Russians and people of other ethnic groups, their language and their rights that are guaranteed by European conventions. These are Russian-speaking people. These are people who feel themselves as part of the great Russian world. It's not ethnic Russians necessarily, but those who feel themselves as Russians. So what kind of response did our Western partners expect from us, given the developments in Ukraine? Of course, we had no right to leave Crimeans and people in Sevastopol in the lurch, to the mercy of radicals and nationalists. We didn't want our access to the Black Sea restricted. We didn't want the city of Sevastopol and the coast of Crimea be occupied by NATO forces, and so that there would be a drastic shift in terms of the status quo, in terms of the balance of power in the Black Sea. So we don't want all of the achievements by the in Russian history, starting from Peter the Great, to be undone. Russia will promote the interests of Russians and will protect the interests of Russians using economic, political and any other means, humanitarian operations including, and also the right for self-defense. I'd like to underline that what happened in Ukraine is the culmination of the negative trends in international affairs, and that has been accumulated over the past several years. So we have warned in advance about that, and our forecasts are coming true. And you've heard about the latest attempts to restore peace in Ukraine, and of course the staff of the foreign ministry and the foreign minister have taken an active role in securing peace. You've heard about multiple conferences and negotiations. Unfortunately, President Poroshenko took the decision to resume the military operation, and we were not able, but when I say we, it's me and my counterparts in the West. We have not been able to persuade him that the road to a long and lasting peace cannot lie through a war. And today, Mr. Poroshenko didn't have anything to do with the previous military orders, but now he's taken up the full responsibility for the continuation of this military campaign. We have not been able to voice the plan that we agreed between the four counterparts, France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia, the declaration on the necessity to preserve peace. After the ceasefire was declared, the substantive negotiations never started. There was just an ultimatum on disarmament. That was good enough. I mean, the declaration of ceasefire, but that's not enough to settle the situation, to arrive at a lasting solution. So what about the Constitution? It was declared, but it was never discussed. There are still debates inside Ukraine whether it's good or bad, but no one consulted the east of Ukraine on the constitution. Of course, it's the domestic affairs of Ukraine, and we regret that people are dying, and it's the civilian population that are dying, and you're well aware that the number of refugees that have crossed the Russian border is growing, and of course we'll extend all the assistance. But it's unacceptable when journalists are killed, and I reminded President Poroshenko about that yesterday. As I see it, the representatives of the media, both foreign and Russian journalists, are being targeted. Who is afraid of objective information being spread? It's those who commit crimes. And we very much hope that the statements from the Kiev authorities on the investigation will be implemented. There are more and more regions in the world where we see turbulent developments. It's Europe, the Middle East, Asia, the Asia-Pacific, Africa. We see systemic disbalances in trade, finances. We see that moral and spiritual values are being eroded. There are no doubts that the unipolar model of the world development has failed. People want to determine their path for the future themselves. They want to keep their cultural identity, and that runs counter to attempt by some countries to preserve their dominance in the defense, in ideology, in politics and finance. It has nothing to do with us directly, but what's being done to French banks can't cause anything but indignation in Europe and here in Russia. We are aware of the pressure that our US partners exert over France in terms of not exporting Mistral helicopter carriers to Russia, and there was a caveat that if they didn't supply those helicopter carriers, they would lessen or even lift those sanctions against French banks. It's unacceptable to work like this on international affairs. Of course, sanctions, as we presume, they should be only adopted in line with Article 7 of the UN Charter. Otherwise, these are not sanctions, or it might be something else, some unilateral tool. Over the past 2 years, our partners have convinced us that they have good intentions, that they want to preserve cooperation, but they have expanded NATO. They've moved their political borders closer to Russia's borders. And when we posed legitimate question to them, do you want to discuss this with us? They said, it's none of your business. There are still those who talk that they're exceptional. They don't like Russia's independent policy, and events in Ukraine prove that. And the model that is perverse with double standards doesn't work. But I still believe that pragmatism will prevail. We need to get rid of ambitions from attempts to build a world garrison and to impose common rules of conduct and rules of behavior. We need to build a world based on mutual respect, on mutual consideration of interests. Every country can be different. Every country can build a society, a world which is different. In its foreign policy, Russia has consistently pursued cooperation, has promoted for cooperation, for compromises, and not for confrontation. We urge for the fact that international law should be equal to everyone and should not be used discriminately to service the interests of individual states, and it should also be interpreted in one fashion. You shouldn't interpret it in one way today and in a completely different way tomorrow, just to suit someone's interests. You cannot unify world development, but you need to find points of convergence. You need to see not just competitors in each other, but also partners. We need to build cooperation between the countries, between integration structures. That was our basic assumption. That's what we proceeded from when we promoted our cooperation in the CIS, developing mutually acceptable cooperation and trade ties. This is a priority in Russia's foreign policy, and it's a long-term policy. The driving force behind the Eurasian Integration Union is the Troika, Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan. The deal signed on May the 25th marks a landmark stage. We are creating a new area which will be appealing for investors. We are creating a common market. And of course, the CIS countries are very much interested in joining it, and I very much hope that Armenia will join us very soon. Negotiations with Kyrgyzstan are at an advanced stage. We are open to other countries as well. By promoting this Eurasian integration process, we do not isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. We are prepared to negotiate prospects for free trade zones with individual countries and with regional organizations. With the EU in particular, Europe is a key strategic partner. We want to find new ways to expand our trade ties and investment opportunities. We need to remove the barriers for trade. We need to upgrade our legal framework, especially in energy as a key sector. That should be a cooperation based on respect for mutual interests. And that, of course, will define the stability of the whole Eurasian space. And, of course, the stable and steady development of our economies. We're always invested into natural gas infrastructure together with the EU authorities. We built the Nord Stream pipeline along the bed of the North Sea. And, of course, despite the barriers, we will push for the South Stream project to be implemented. And of course, we all understand that the EU is being used by someone, that it's become the victim of a short-sighted approach. And Ukraine has breached its obligations in terms of buying gas, and they have failed to pay for the gas. They have not paid for November and December, and this is completely unacceptable. Our partners are resorting to blackmail. They want a decrease in price, completely unjustified. Although the contract was signed in 2009, that was implemented in good faith. And as you know, the Ukrainian court has lifted all of the charges against former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, which signed this contract. So it means that the Ukrainian judiciary acknowledged that the contract is in line with international law and with the Ukrainian law, but still they don't want to pay for that, they don't want to deliver on their commitments. Since starting from June the 16th, we've switched to advance payments, and so they will only receive as much gas as they pay for. At the moment, they don't get anything from us. They only get natural gas on the so-called reverse supplies. Well, but actually, there's no reverse. You cannot push gas using the same pipe backwards. You don't need to be an expert in natural gas to understand that it's not possible. They are using our natural gas and they pay for that. We are aware of that. We're not taking any steps at the moment, just not to escalate the situation. But of course, we all need to learn the lessons. But good faith consumers and good faith suppliers should not be held a victim and prisoners in this situation. But we all need to think of how to minimize different political economic risks and to avoid different force majeures. In August 2015, we will mark the 40-year anniversary of the final acts of the OSCE. This anniversary not only gives us an opportunity to go back to the founding principles of our cooperation on the continent, but also we need to ensure that they are part of the European policy, that they are effective. We need to make sure that there are no unconstitutional coups on the European continent. There are no interference from the outside. There is no promotion of radical and neo-Nazi forces. We all need some safety net so that there's no repeat of the Iraq, of Libya, of the Syrian scenario, and also the Ukrainian. This shouldn't become a contagion that would spread around Europe. It's especially dangerous for the post-Soviet countries because these countries are fragile politically, economically. They don't have a stable, sustainable political system. So it's crucial to respect the constitutional foundation of these countries. So why is it important generally, not just in the CIS countries, but in Europe as a whole? Because even in the countries of Eastern and Western Europe, where seemingly things are okay, there are a lot of hidden ethnic and social differences which could escalate, which could give rise to extremism, and could be used, exploited by external forces. They could rock the boat and could lead to the toppling of the government in an illegal way, and then we could all see the negative ramifications. We need to provide guarantees of indivisible security. We need to respect each other. This should be the foundation. And from that, we could proceed to building a common humanitarian, cultural, economic space from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. I talked about that as a single common space from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And I urged the Foreign Ministry to come up with recommendations to implement this concept. Our main goal is to use the main principle of non-interference and to put it inside the European policy framework. We need to increase our cooperation with the Asian countries and to focus more on the Asia-Pacific. Of course, that would help us to develop the Far East and Siberia. The policy of Russia in the Asia-Pacific should be built on the protection of our eastern borders, on ensuring the stability in the region, and Russia will chair the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and in the summer of June 2015 we will host in the city of Ufa the summits of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS. We need to increase our cooperation with China. We are seeing a close diplomatic duo between Russia and China. We both share the same opinions on a variety of diplomatic situations. We are not cooperating against someone. We are not building any blocks. It's a vivid example of a very productive cooperation based on mutual respect and cooperation. We want to develop our relations with our traditional partners, India and Vietnam, who are playing an increasing role in the world. We'll cooperate with other countries in ASEAN, in Latin America, in Africa. We will, of course, rely on our huge experience in terms of cultural and economic ties. And, of course, our ties with the US. We don't want to isolate. Bilateral relations are not at its high, but it's not because of Russia. We always wanted to be a predictable partner. We always wanted to build our relationship on an equitable basis. But instead, our legitimate concerns and interests have been ignored. Another point I would like to make, as for different multilateral formats and meetings, if we are given the role of just an observer who have no say over vital areas, then actually we're not interested very much in these multilateral formats. We shouldn't pay, we shouldn't sacrifice and compromise our national interests for the right of just sitting nearby those leaders. And I think the Western partners should realize that. We often hear ultimatums, we're often being lectured, but we are ready for a constructive dialogue, but only on an equitable basis. Colleagues, the situation in the world is very complicated, and of course Russian diplomats should be highly qualified. As for the situation in Ukraine and Crimea, Russian mission abroad have been acting in a concerted way. I'd like to thank you for that. And also very much appreciate the work of our permanent representatives at the UN and other international organizations. We should work in the same dignified and determined fashion. We should be patient and have this sense of proportion. We should rely on the arguments which are non-negotiable. We should rely on the moral strength. And of course, the leadership of Russia will do everything to make sure that you can conduct your own activities. Of course, diplomatic service needs to be codified as a special kind of service for the Russian Federation. We'll consider these remarks. So the first part is now over. I would like to thank the media for the attention. But the remainder will be said behind closed doors.
Vladimir Putin is in Cuba's capital to start a week-long tour of Latin America, his longest foreign tour since returning to the Kremlin in 2012. Well, ahead of the journey, he gave an interview in which he insisted that in today's globalized world, no state or group of countries can tackle international problems by themselves. Our correspondent Alexei Rashevsky is following the president to see what South America and Russia have to offer each other.
The sun-faded buildings of Havana may make a good tourist picture, but they are a part of a sad reality. Time seems to be standing still here. 50 years of sanctions against Cuba is having a huge toll on the country's economy. Cubans want to move forward, but in order to do that, they need a strong partner, and Moscow has made no secret it is willing to become one. That's why the first stop of Vladimir Putin's longest ever foreign trip to Latin American countries starts here. Putin and Raul Castro will rubber stamp an unprecedented agreement. Moscow is writing off 90% of Cuba's debt to the USSR. That's $32 billion, astronomical money for a poor country like Cuba. The remaining 10% will be reinvested into social and infrastructure projects on Cuba. The intrigue is what Havana will offer in return. Speculation takes in everything from major oil deals, Cuba potentially has a lot of it but has no money to extract, to rebuilding Soviet military bases on the island. And that's less than 100 miles from the coast of the United States. The next stop is Buenos Aires. President Kirchner has been very supportive of Moscow in its standoff with the West and regrets that trade with Russia has not been better. The two leaders will aim to increase the annual $1.8 billion turnover, but it's energy deals where both hope to gain a lot. A fifth of Argentina's power is provided using Russian technology, and the new nuclear power plant, which will be built by Russia, a multi-billion deal, will certainly increase that. Last but certainly not least is Brazil. Not only will Putin be lucky enough to witness the World Cup final from the stands and go through a symbolic handover of Mundial from Brazil to Russia, he has a lot to discuss with Dilma Rousseff. Brazil is Russia's key trading partner in Latin America, and the two leaders share a common view on US wiretapping scandals. President Rousseff was one of the world leaders whose phone was hacked by the NSA. So a joint information security project will be on the agenda. Here Putin will also meet a dozen Latin American presidents in hope of striking new partnerships. The tour will culminate with a BRICS summit, where the final bricks of a joint bank will be laid. The new financial body will have a $100 billion budget and could represent a solid attempt by developing economies to become less dependent on the US dollar. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from Havana, Cuba.